Somewhere in Iran right now, 4 military commanders are sitting in 4 separate underground bunkers in 4 different cities. They don't communicate with each other. They don't need to. Each one already knows exactly what to do the moment the man above them in the chain of command stops breathing. And what they've been ordered to do will make your blood run cold. This isn't a war game. This isn't a simulation. This is Iran's live operational architecture, built specifically to survive an American strike and keep firing long after Washington thinks the war is over. And it all started this week when Ayatollah Ali Khamenei wrote his will. Not a personal will, not something about property or family, a governmental will, a formal state directive that lays out exactly what happens to Iran the morning after America kills its supreme leader. And what he put inside that document is about to force every military planner in Washington and Tel Aviv to tear up everything they thought they knew about how this war ends. This is not a story about missiles. It's not about aircraft carriers, bunker busters, or enrichment percentages. Those are the weapons. This is a story about what those weapons cannot destroy. And why that question? What survives after the strike is the single most important thing you need to understand before this week is over. Stay with me. Because by the time we're done here, you're going to see this crisis in a completely different way than every major network is showing you. Here's what actually happened. Khamenei summoned Ali Larijani, Iran's most trusted political and security figure, former parliament speaker, and his senior strategic advisor, to a private meeting. And in that meeting, Khamenei didn't just give advice, he delivered a formal state directive, a contingency government built for every possible scenario of American and Israeli military action. 4 layers, not one succession plan, not 2. 4 complete independent chains of command for the military, for the IRGC, for the Navy, for the Air Force, for the government itself. And here's the critical part. Each layer automatically activates the moment the layer above it is eliminated. Think about what that means in operational terms. If the supreme leader is killed, layer 1 activates. If the person in layer 1 is then targeted and killed, layer 2 activates without waiting for any order, because there is no one left to give one. If layer 2 is eliminated, layer 3. If layer 3, then layer 4. And the commander in layer 4 has already been given their standing instructions, their targets, their allies to contact, and one single non-negotiable command: do not stop. Do not negotiate. Do not surrender. Fire everything. Now, you might be wondering, hasn't America dealt with decentralized command structures before? Hasn't this been tried? Yes. And that's exactly why what Khamenei built next is so significant. He studied Hezbollah. After Hassan Nasrallah was killed, Khamenei watched America and Israel systematically work down the succession list, killing Nasrallah, then his designated successor, then the next, until Hezbollah's command structure was so disoriented it could not mount a coherent response. That playbook worked. Israel and America know it worked. And Khamenei watched every second of it and built a counter-architecture specifically engineered to defeat it. The key innovation is communication independence. Khamenei told each layer, as commanders, something that changes the entire logic of decapitation warfare. If you receive no orders from above, if cyber attacks freeze communications, if leadership is unreachable, if the command chain is severed, you do not wait. You already have your targets. You already have your protocols. The absence of orders is itself the order to proceed. Strategic planners have a name for what Khamenei just built at the national government level. They call it a dead man's switch. A dead man's switch fires automatically when the hand holding it goes slack. Khamenei's system fires automatically when the chain of command goes dark. No hesitation, no confusion, no leadership vacuum to exploit. The missiles don't wait for a live order from a live commander. They leave on a pre-planned schedule tied to the confirmation of a trigger event. And here's where it gets deeply uncomfortable for American war planners. The trigger events are not limited to Khamenei's death. They include a communication blackout lasting beyond a defined threshold, a cyber attack that severs command and control networks, and simultaneous strikes on multiple leadership locations. Every single one of those triggers is already built into America's attritional campaign plan. And every single one of them, under Khamenei's new directive, becomes a launch authorization rather than a disruption. America's disruption strategy just became Iran's activation strategy. Now hold that thought, because something landed on the American side of this equation today that transforms the entire strategic picture. White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff went on Fox News and said it plainly: Iran is approximately 1 week away from having enough enriched uranium to build at least one nuclear bomb. Iran has been enriching uranium at up to 60%, well beyond anything needed for civilian energy use. 1 week. That is the window inside which America must either achieve a deal, destroy the enrichment infrastructure before the material reaches weapons-grade concentration, or accept that Iran holds the fissile material for a nuclear device, even if the delivery system, the warhead design, and the assembly facility aren't yet operational. 1 week. 2 carrier strike groups in the Persian Gulf. 200 plus fighter jets, and a dead man's switch that turns America's own strike plan into Iran's launch trigger. You see the problem, and then comes the gap that reveals exactly where the diplomacy actually stands. Witkoff restated Trump's red line: zero enrichment for Iran in any future deal. Zero. But in the same breath, Trump is reportedly considering an Iranian proposal that would allow what is being called token uranium enrichment. Zero versus token. That gap between the stated red line and the compromise being quietly considered is where the entire diplomatic endgame is being negotiated right now. Because here's Iran's position, and it's not irrational. Civilian nuclear energy requires some level of enrichment. Iran argues it has the sovereign right to enrich on its own soil. And zero enrichment from Tehran's perspective is not a deal. It is a surrender document dressed up in diplomatic language. And surrendering, as Khamenei's four-layer governmental will makes absolutely clear, is not an option he has authorized any successor to accept. Witkoff said something else that deserves very careful attention. He said the final decision on Iran will be made according to Trump's policies. Not international law, not UN resolutions, not the IAEA framework, Trump's policies. That framing from America's own envoy tells every country watching this crisis exactly what kind of arrangement is being offered. Not a multilateral agreement with international verification. A bilateral deal between Washington and Tehran where the terms are whatever Trump decides, verified in whatever way Trump decides is sufficient, and enforced by the threat sitting in the Persian Gulf with 75 aircraft on its flight deck. That is the offer on the table, and Khamenei read it clearly. But there is a second track running parallel to all of this, and it may be the most consequential part of the story. This weekend, while Geneva talks were ongoing and the four-layer succession plan was being communicated to Larijani, White House envoy Steve Witkoff met secretly with Reza Pahlavi, the exiled former crown prince of Iran. According to a senior U.S. official, this was the first high-level meeting between the Iranian opposition and the Trump administration since the protests began. Reza Pahlavi is 65 years old. He left Iran as a teenager when his father's government collapsed in 1979. He has spent his entire adult life in exile in Egypt and Morocco, and for the past 4 decades here in the United States, maintaining a public profile, building an opposition network, and waiting for a moment that most analysts told him would never come. Last week, he addressed a crowd in Munich and announced he was ready to lead Iran to a secular, democratic future. And then Trump's personal envoy sat down with him in a secret meeting. Witkoff described Trump as curious about why Iran hadn't capitulated. And notably, capitulated was the word he initially used before pulling back. That word choice tells you everything about how Washington frames this negotiation internally. Not compromise, no agreement, capitulation. So what exactly is the Pahlavi option? Axios' sourcing inside the Trump White House used a very specific phrase, transitional leader. And those two words are the most consequential in this entire story. A transitional leader is not an elected president. A transitional leader is someone who arrives in the power vacuum created by a regime's sudden collapse and claims legitimacy before anyone else can organize an alternative. A transitional leader needs 3 things: recognition from a major power, a transport mechanism into the country, and enough public momentum on the ground to prevent immediate rejection. America provides the recognition. A private charter aircraft under military protection provides the transport. And the protests, which have continued across Iranian cities with demonstrators chanting Javad Shah and Pahlavi, will return, providing the ground momentum. Or at least the appearance of it, sufficient for the international optics of a transition. Karim Sajadpour, a senior analyst at the Carnegie Endowment, told Axios that Pahlavi provides a unifying focus for nationalist sentiment among protesters. And here is the detail that captures both the power and the fragility of this option simultaneously. Most of these protesters were born after the 1979 revolution. They have nostalgia for an era they never experienced. They know the Islamic Republic failed them. They do not know whether the Shah's dynasty would do better. That uncertainty is the fault line running straight through the center of the entire regime change strategy, because Khamenei anticipated this too. The standing instructions given to each layer of his contingency command include a specific directive. If foreign-backed opposition attempts to seize institutional control during the conflict period, treat them as enemy combatants. The IRGC, the Basiji, the intelligence services, all 4 succession layers have been told that a Pahlavi restoration attempt is not a separate political event. It is an extension of the American military campaign, and it should be responded to accordingly. So here is where we are right now, and I want you to feel the weight of this. Khamenei said publicly this week while Witkoff was meeting Pahlavi in secret while Geneva talks were ongoing, while the 4-layer succession plan was being transmitted. He said it clearly and without qualification. Trump will not succeed in destroying the Islamic Republic. That was not defiance for cameras. That statement has an operational architecture behind it. a dead man's switch embedded into Iran's institutional structure at every single level. Military, governmental intelligence, Revolutionary Guard, is designed to ensure that even if every person named in the current leadership structure is killed, Iran's capacity to retaliate continues, without interruption, without a leadership vacuum, without the 48-hour paralysis window that America's entire strike plan is betting on. Trump reportedly told Witkoff he doesn't understand why Iran hasn't simply come forward and said, "We don't want a weapon, here's what we're prepared to do." That confusion from the most powerful leader in the world is actually the most revealing data point of this entire crisis. Because while Trump is confused about why Iran hasn't capitulated, Iran's supreme leader has spent this week writing a governmental will, scattering his leadership across separate underground locations in separate cities, communicating standing battle orders to 4 independent succession layers, and simultaneously sending his foreign minister to Geneva to present a written deal proposal. Iran is not confused about what it wants. Iran wants to survive as a sovereign state while maintaining its nuclear knowledge and its regional influence. It is willing to negotiate the form of that survival. It is not willing to negotiate the fact of it. The government will be Khamenei's answer to Pahlavi's charter plane. The 4-layer system is Iran's answer to the decapitation plan. The Geneva proposal is Iran's answer to the deadline. And America, holding 2 carrier strike groups, a finalized attritional campaign plan, a secret meeting with the Shah's son, and a 1-week nuclear countdown, is still, as of this moment, deciding which of its answers it will use first. The government's will is written, the succession layers are in place, the commanders already have their targets, history is being written in real time, and most people watching the news right now are only seeing the surface of it. If this kind of deep, unfiltered analysis is what you've been missing, the kind that goes past the headlines and into the actual mechanics of power, then you already know this channel is different. Share this video with one person who needs to see it. And tell me in the comments, do you think Khamenei's dead man's switch actually changes America's military calculus? Or is it the world's most elaborate bluff? I'll be reading every single response. Thanks for watching.